Welcome to the Poultry Doc Podcast. I'm Dr. Blayne, a board-certified poultry vet and connoisseur of hot chicks. Today, we're coming to you from Callahan's General Store in Austin, Texas, and we'll be talking all about what to look for when picking out healthy chicks for your flock. Whether you're a first-timer or a seasoned chicken keeper, this one's for you. Let's dive in. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Blayne, host of the PoultryDoc.com. Today we're at Callahan's General Store in Austin, Texas, and we'll be looking at the baby chicks that they just got in. It's Thursday, so they get shipments on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the goal of today's podcast is to guide you through picking chicks out for your flock and what to look for in these baby birds, and so that they're the strongest and most viable, and they're going to produce well and do well once you get them home. So when I'm looking at these chicks, I'll notice that there's several different sizes. Now, in this particular case, there are several different varieties of chickens in here, but if I isolate one variety, I'll notice usually some size variation within those. So that's most likely due to the source flock, where they came from. So young breeder flocks will lay smaller eggs, old breeder flocks will lay larger eggs. Those younger pullet flocks producing smaller eggs have smaller chicks, and sometimes those just aren't quite, they don't have the energy, they're smaller, they've got a smaller yolk. They may not start off as well, right? That doesn't mean they would be a bad selection. They're energetic and moving around. I'm not too concerned about it. On the other side, the older hens that are laying eggs are going to have that bigger egg. They are going to have a bigger yolk inside of it, more albumin, so the chick ends up getting more energy. Now, while that's a good thing, the downsides of older breeder flocks is that as eggs get larger, that hen always puts down the same amount of calcium. And so what happens is the egg shell gets thinner. And so the consequence of that is we can have bacteria enter the eggshell, and some of these larger chicks have more tendency to be what we call contamination. So like a E. coli infection of the navel would be a good example, or peritonitis would be another one. So, if we had the luxury of picking exactly what we wanted, not too small, not too big, somewhere right in the middle. Again, that's just the generality, like when I'm picking things, so I'm not hard fixed on avoiding small ones and avoiding the big ones. The next thing is, obvious too, is just looking at activity. Some of these birds are moving around, there's nothing just laying in the litter, kind of stationary, so that's one thing. I want them bright and active. Another thing I'm looking for is down that's fluffy and thick. What can happen in a setter or in the hatcher when these birds get ready to hatch out, and once they hatch, if they're overheated, like the natural response to this chick is going to be to blow its down feathers, and so they'll look more naked, thinner is another way to find them. Now the downside of that is that increased temperature in those later stages of incubation are going to be stressful on the bird. So again, we want to avoid any sort of stress that we can when selecting these chicks. I've picked out two different varieties, and so it's not a fair comparison. It's kind of apples to oranges, but it almost provide an example of kind of what we're looking for here. The two chicks on the left, these are white Cochin Bantams, and I've got a silver Seabright, I think, on the right. But what you can see here is the Seabright is very kind of fluffy, has a lot of down on it, and you can see the smaller Bantams, maybe more nakedish, not quite as fluffy. Now, I don't know exactly, they all look like that out of this hatch, so maybe they had a little rough patch in late incubation, higher temperatures. They're also really small, all of them, and breed varieties too, when you're looking, some will be smaller, the chicks will be smaller than others, so take that into consideration too. But so here we've got two small chicks versus, I would say, like a medium to small size chick, and again, I think that's just associated with the variety that we're looking at. So another important thing to consider when you're buying chicks is just how long it's been since they've been hatched. One of the easiest ways to determine this is by looking at the primary wing feathers. So those primary wing feathers develop at a constant rate whether the chicks have started on feed or not. So basically these wing feathers will start to grow soon after, within 12 to 24 hours of being hatched. They'll start to develop, which means the feather will start to protrude out of the pin and then grow at a constant rate, with or without the birds being on feed. So it allows us, it's like a metric to know when these birds hatch versus their hatch mates. So these two birds came out of the same batch, and what I'm doing is I'm looking at their fold out the wing a little bit, and you can see just slightly the one on my right really has zero feather development. There's still just down coming out of the end of the quills there. versus the one on the left, you start to see those feathers just starting to protrude out and starting to grow. So I can tell you that this bird, the one on my left, hatched before the one on my right. And what does that mean? Well, if this bird hatched first, it could potentially have been in that hatching environment where you've got a lot of wind moving around. It's warm, obviously, that keeps them comfortable, but it also can dehydrate them as well. So we worry about them, again, they've been out hatched without feed or water longer than the others, and that can cause stress. And so what we want to look for are birds that, if you're picking out and you have the opportunity to pick out multiple birds, find those that develop, that have less development of those primary wing feathers. Okay, one of the next things good to look at, and this is going to be the health of the chick, how much stress it's gone through in its hatching process, but we want to look at the hocks. So if I take this chick and turn it over, these are all healthy, by the way. I've spent several minutes trying to find an example of what I want to show you, and out of the hundreds of chicks here, I haven't been able to find it. So, Callahan's has some good chicks available. Ideal's the supplier, so we can talk more about that later. But these particular chicks, what I'm looking for is there'll be a little scab or red spot, referred to really as red hock. And so right on the surface, right at that joint, we'll see a red lesion. Usually it looks like the skin has been rubbed off. And this chick is perfectly healthy, nothing's wrong with it. But what I just want to point out is the lesion would be right here over this hock. And it can come in a variety of severities where it's just very mild, you may see a little reddening, to there's this significant erosion of the skin. Obviously, the more severe the lesion, the harder it was for that chick to get out and the more stressed it was. So when we're picking out chicks, we want to avoid those with red hock. It's something to look for. Or if you're hatching eggs too and you're getting red hocks, that's probably an indication that you've got your humidity is not quite right in incubation.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Another thing we want to look for is the navel. In some cases, that navel can be underdeveloped, and that's a sign of increased temperatures or too warm of temperatures in the setter. So the final stages of incubation, what happens is the chick draws in the yolk into the abdomen and the abdomen closes up. If temperatures are too warm, that closure happens too fast and actually doesn't completely close, and so you'll end up with what's called a button on the navel, and that's essentially a scab that scabbed over and covered up that lesion. But what that is it's a nidus for infection, and so what can happen is if that gets infected, then we can have the abdomen of the chick become infected as well. And so again, we want to look for these navel buttons. Sometimes there's a little string hanging out. Could be another nidus for infection. So you'll see what are called strings or tags. We want to avoid those. And then that red sear on here too. So we want to just give it a good inspection and make sure that there's no lesions and the bird's happy and healthy.
Thanks for joining us here at Callahan's. If you have questions regarding today's episode, submit them in the comments below. If you found it helpful, peck that like button, follow the Poultry Doc Podcast, and check out more tips at thepoultrydoc.com. Know more, worry less, vet your flock.